guard for a moment before nodding. Yeah, we're covering the event. Who are you? Sophia gave him a firm nod, maintaining an air of authority. Freelancer. Former military. I was asked to cover the veteran employment segment. The man barely gave her a second glance before shrugging. All right, just stick with us. Security is tight. And just like that, she was in. The moment that changed everything. Inside the Grand Conference Hall, chandeliers cast golden light over a sea of journalists, officials, and cameras all pointed at the stage. President Donald Trump stood behind a polished podium, his voice steady, his presence commanding. The economy is the strongest it has ever been, Trump declared. American jobs are coming back, wages are rising, and we are taking care of our veterans like never before. A murmur of approval ran through the crowd, but Sophia felt something snap inside her. Taking care of our veterans? She clenched her fists. Then why am I homeless? Why are thousands of my brothers and sisters struggling just like me? Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward. Mr. President, her voice rang out, cutting through the noise of the conference. The room fell silent. Hundreds of eyes turned toward her. Secret Service agents tensed, stepping forward, but Trump raised a hand, stopping them. His gaze locked onto her. Yes? Sophia swallowed hard, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear her own voice. My name is Sophia Walker. I'm a veteran, first lieutenant, U.S. Army. I served my country for 10 years. She took a deep breath, her voice unwavering despite the lump in her throat. But now, after all that service, I can't even get a job interview. No one wants to hire veterans. They say we don't fit into corporate culture. They say we lack experience. But I've led teams under fire. I've made life or death decisions. I know how to work harder than anyone else in that room. She lifted her chin. So I have only one question. Sir, can you give me a job? The room was frozen in shock. No one had ever spoken to a sitting president like this at a live press conference. Trump didn't flinch. Instead, he studied her for a long moment. His expression unreadable. The tension in the room was suffocating. Reporters were waiting, pens ready to twist this moment into a headline. His critics were eager for him to dismiss her. His supporters were waiting to see how he would respond. And then, he did something no one expected. A response that shocked the nation. Trump slowly set his notes down and leaned forward. Sophia, do you have a resume on you? Sophia blinked. The question caught her off guard. Yes, sir, right here. She pulled out a slightly crumpled resume from her bag, her hands shaking slightly as she extended it. Without hesitation, Trump gestured for an aide. Take this. I want her in my office tomorrow morning. Gasps rippled through the hall. Cameras flashed. The journalists exploded into a frenzy. Trump turned back to Sophia. You say companies won't hire veterans. I say that's a disgrace. Our veterans are the backbone of this country. And if corporate America won't give them a chance, I will. You have a meeting at Trump Organization tomorrow at 9 a.m. Let's see what you're made of. Sophia's breath hitched. The weight of his words crashed down on her. She wasn't just being heard. She was being given a real chance. The crowd erupted into applause. Even some of the toughest journalists looked stunned. Sophia stood there, frozen, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. One more thing, Trump added, turning back to the cameras. I want every major corporation watching this to take note. If you have the guts to say veterans don't fit in your workforce, then maybe you don't belong in America's future. The statement sent shockwaves through the room. The headlines were already being written. The aftermath, a national movement begins. The next morning, Sophia Walker arrived at Trump Tower. By noon, she had an offer, not just for a job, but to help create a new initiative for veteran employment within Trump's business network. But that was only the beginning. Within days, the clip of her question and Trump's response went viral. Millions of Americans saw the exchange. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of companies across the country began re-evaluating their hiring policies. Job fairs specifically for veterans saw record attendance. Even critics had to acknowledge that something powerful had happened. Sophia wasn't just another struggling veteran anymore. She had become the face of a movement for change. And it all started because she dared to ask one question. Witnessing something unprecedented, a veteran, standing in the middle of a high-profile press conference, challenging the President of the United States in front of the entire nation. Donald Trump, who had been halfway through turning away from the podium, stopped. Slowly, he turned back, his sharp gaze locking onto Sophia. The murmurs in the room died instantly. He studied her for a moment, the weight of her words settling in. Come again? His voice was firm but not dismissive. Sophia inhaled deeply, forcing herself to stand even taller. I served this country. I led soldiers. I made life or death decisions every day. And now? No one will hire me. No one wants to give veterans a chance. So I came here to ask you, Mr. President, will you? A stunned silence filled the room. The response that changed everything. For the first time that night, Donald Trump didn't have a scripted answer. He didn't look to his aides. He didn't check his notes. He simply stared at the woman before him. Then, without hesitation, he did something no one expected. Bring me your resume. The room exploded. Reporters gasped. Cameras zoomed in. Journalists whispered furiously among themselves. Sophia hesitated for just a second before reaching into her bag, her fingers brushing against the worn edges of her carefully folded resume. Her hands trembled slightly as she extended it forward. Trump gestured to one of his aides. Take it. I want it on my desk first thing tomorrow morning. The shockwaves through the room were palpable. Some reporters scrambled to reframe their headlines. Others watched in disbelief. But Trump wasn't finished. He turned back to the crowd, his voice steady and deliberate. This is unacceptable, he declared. A soldier who risked her life for this country should never have to ask for a job. She should already have one. And if American businesses don't recognize the value of our veterans, then we're going to change that. A wave of applause erupted from the audience, not from the journalists, but from staff members, security personnel, and even some of the press. Trump glanced back at Sophia. I don't know where you'll be working yet, but I can guarantee this, you won't be jobless for long. Sophia felt her breath hitch. She had come here expecting resistance, expecting security to drag her out before she could even finish speaking. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected hope. A national movement begins. The moment went viral. Within hours, clips of Sophia's confrontation with the president flooded social media. People across the country, veterans and civilians alike, began sharing their own struggles, their own frustrations with the system. It wasn't just about her anymore. The next day, as promised, Sophia received a call, not from an aide, not from a secretary, but from Donald Trump himself. Sophia, you wanted a job? His voice was as direct as ever. I have something better. I want you to help fix this problem. Within weeks, a new initiative was launched, a national program connecting veterans to employment opportunities. Backed by the White House and multiple major corporations, Sophia was at the forefront of it. She had gone from unemployed and unheard to leading a movement that would change thousands of lives. And it all started with one question. Mr. President, I need a job. Trump's decision that shook the nation. A ripple of murmurs spread through the press room. Journalists exchanged glances, realizing they were witnessing something unprecedented. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion on Sophia Walker's face. On stage, Donald Trump studied her with sharp eyes, his expression unreadable. After a few beats of tense silence, he finally spoke, his voice low and commanding. What did you just say? Sophia clenched her fists, steadying her breath, but when she spoke, her voice did not waver. I served this country for 10 years. But when I came home, I realized something. No one wants to hire a veteran like me. I've sent out dozens of job applications, and every single one was rejected. I'm not here asking for pity. I just need a chance to prove that I am worth something. A murmur spread through the room. Some reporters exchanged intrigued glances, while others turned to one another, whispering. This had never happened before. A complete stranger, a veteran, standing up in the middle of a high-profile press conference, directly challenging the President of the United States to give her a chance. Trump tilted his head slightly, scrutinizing her. You're telling me you can't find a job? Sophia nodded. No one wants to hire a veteran. Some think we can't adapt. Others are afraid we're damaged. But do you know what hurts the most? Mr. President? She took a steady breath, her voice unwavering. We gave our youth, our strength, our lives for this country. And when we come back, this country turns its back on us. A heavy silence fell over the room. Even Trump's closest advisors, normally quick to prepare responses, exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't just a political question, it was a cry for help. A public challenge. Broadcast lived to millions. Trump's gaze sharpened. What do you want? Sophia's hands clenched at her sides. I want a job. Not a favor. Not charity. Just a chance to prove that veterans are not burdens. We are this country's greatest asset. For a moment, Trump was silent. He tapped his fingers lightly against the podium, his eyes narrowing in thought. Then, without warning, he set down his briefing papers, planted both hands on the podium, and locked eyes with her. Come up here. The entire room jolted. A few reporters inhaled sharply. Others scrambled to flip open their notebooks, desperate to capture every word. Secret Service agents stiffened, their bodies tensing as if preparing for the unexpected. Sophia's heart pounded against her ribs. For a split second, she hesitated. Then, like a soldier responding to a direct order, she stepped forward. She moved past rows of stunned reporters, past curious, skeptical gazes, past cameras that captured every single step. This moment, this very moment, would change her life forever. And no matter what happened next, she would never regret speaking up. The press conference fell into absolute silence. The only sound was the steady, deliberate echo of her footsteps on the polished floor. She had faced bullets, led rescue missions, and survived the battlefield, yet standing before the most powerful man in America, in front of millions watching at home, made her heart race like never before. Trump remained standing, both hands firmly planted on the podium. His sharp gaze was locked onto her, unwavering. He wasn't rushing, wasn't hesitating. He was assessing her, measuring every word she had just spoken. Sophia stopped a few steps from the podium, standing tall, shoulders squared, her eyes steady. I served this country for 10 years. I led a logistics unit in Afghanistan, ensuring that hundreds of soldiers had the supplies they needed to survive on the battlefield. I've worked under unimaginable pressure. I've made life or death decisions in seconds. But when I came home, no one needed me anymore. Trump slowly folded his arms across his chest, nodding slightly. You're telling me you can't find a job? Sophia swallowed hard. No company will hire me. They look at my resume and see one thing, veteran. And just like that, they assume I can't adapt. They're afraid I have psychological issues. They think I can't work in a team. That I don't know how to function outside the military. The room went silent. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion on her face. Some journalists typed furiously, realizing they were witnessing a moment that would be talked about for years. Trump tilted his head slightly. So tell me, what do you want? Sophia didn't blink. I want a chance. Not a handout. Not charity. Just a job. An opportunity to prove that I am not worthless. That veterans are not a burden to this country. Trump was silent. He turned slightly, glancing at his advisors. Some of them exchanged uneasy looks, clearly thrown off by the situation. This wasn't a question they had prepared for. This was real. This was raw. And millions were watching. After a long pause, Trump turned back to Sophia. His voice was steady, slow but commanding. You're right about one thing. This country has a serious problem with how we treat our veterans. We honor them when they go to war. But when they come back, the system forgets them. Sophia didn't break eye contact. Trump planted both hands on the podium. You led a military unit. You handled logistics. You made high-pressure decisions. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need. He turned to his aides. Find out what job openings we have for her, immediately. Gasps echoed through the room. Some reporters dropped their pens. Stunned, a few skeptics whispered among themselves, wondering if this was just a political move. But the expression on Trump's face was serious, decisive. He turned back to Sophia. Can you start Monday? The air in the room grew thick with tension. The cameras zoomed in closer. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She had spent months being ignored, rejected, dismissed, and now, standing before the most powerful man in the country, she heard the words she had fought so hard for. Her voice trembled, but only slightly. Yes, Mr. President, I can start Monday. Trump gave a sharp nod. Then it's done. The room erupted. Some reporters clapped. Others fired off headlines into their phones. Millions watching from home would later flood social media with debates, reactions, and analysis. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about Sophia Walker anymore. This was about every forgotten veteran in America. And today, Their voices had finally been heard. A moment that changed everything. The room was electric. The words that had just left President Trump's mouth weren't just bold, they were unprecedented. Hiring a veteran on the spot. Without any formal hiring process? A decision that defied every bureaucratic norm. A decision that no one saw coming. Reporters gasped, exchanged stunned glances, and whispered among themselves. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every flicker of emotion on Sophia Walker's face. She had come here expecting rejection, maybe even security escorting her out. But now, she was at the center of a decision that would shake the nation. A reporter in the front row shot up his hand, his voice a mix of disbelief and challenge. "Mr. President, are you certain about this decision? Can someone with no prior government experience handle such an important role?" Trump didn't flinch. A small smirk crossed his lips, his eyes gleaming with confidence. "She's never worked in government. But she's served this country on the battlefield. And I trust the judgment of someone who has risked their life for America more than I trust half the bureaucrats running this town." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Some reporters scribbled furiously, while others exchanged skeptical glances. Was this genuine, or just a political stunt? Behind the podium, a senior White House advisor leaned toward a colleague, whispering urgently, "Should we put a stop to this? This is too risky." But it was too late. Trump had made up his mind. He turned back to Sophia, his voice steady, commanding. "On Monday, you will report to the Department of Veterans Affairs, not as a favor. Not as a publicity stunt. But because you stood up and demanded what should have been yours all along." The room buzzed with an unrelenting wave of whispers. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment from every angle. Some reporters debated whether this was a genuine act or a calculated move. Others wondered, was this the start of a movement? Sophia stood frozen, a storm of emotions raging inside her. Shock, disbelief, but above all, an overwhelming sense of responsibility. This was no longer just about her. She took a steady breath, squared her shoulders, and met Trump's gaze with unwavering resolve. "Thank you, Mr. President. I won't let you down." Trump nodded once before turning back to the press. "Any more questions?" A reporter immediately shot up, his voice laced with skepticism. "Is this just a political stunt? Do you really believe that someone with no prior government experience can make a real impact?" Trump smirked, crossed his arms, and delivered a response that made the room explode. "Good question. When she was out on the battlefield, no one asked if she had experience. They only cared about one thing: could she complete the mission? And I believe she can." The room erupted. Keyboards clattered at lightning speed. Journalists leaned into hushed, frantic discussions. This moment, this very moment, would dominate the headlines. A chill ran down Sophia's spine. She had never been trusted like this. Never been handed a responsibility this massive. But that also meant failure was not an option. The aftermath: a nation reacts. That night, the story of Sophia Walker's confrontation with President Trump dominated every major news outlet. Breaking news. President Trump hires veteran on the spot at live press conference. The debate raged across television screens and social media platforms. Some praised Trump for taking immediate action to support veterans, calling it a long overdue decision. Others criticized the move, claiming it was impulsive, a political gamble meant to grab headlines. But for Sophia, none of that mattered. As she sat alone in her small apartment that night, staring at the news reports flashing across her screen, reality sank in. She had won the opportunity, but now, she had to prove she deserved it. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her, heavier than any combat gear she had ever worn. Could she really do this? Would she be able to navigate the endless bureaucracy, the politics, the resistance from those who didn't want change? She didn't know. But she did know one thing: she was ready to fight. Not with weapons, not on a battlefield, but for every veteran who had been forgotten. For every soldier who had come home only to feel like a stranger in their own country. For every single one of them, she would not fail. A battle beyond the battlefield. Headlines flashed across TV screens, newspapers, and social media feeds. Some hailed President Trump's decision as a bold step toward fixing a broken system that had long neglected veterans. Others dismissed it as political theater, an impulsive move with no real strategy. But to Sophia Walker, none of that mattered. She knew only one thing: on Monday morning, She would step into a new battlefield. No guns, no enemies in uniform, but a fight just as brutal, the fight against bureaucracy. A fight to bring justice to the forgotten soldiers who, like her, had been cast aside. The first day, Monday morning, Sophia stood before the towering headquarters of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Inhaling deeply, the building loomed over her, a fortress of government bureaucracy. But what concerned her wasn't its size. It was what waited for her inside. She had heard the stories, endless backlogs of claims. Veterans waiting years for benefits. Men and women trapped in a system that was supposed to help them, but only buried them under mountains of paperwork. And now? She was no longer an outsider looking in. She was inside the fight. Sophia pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped in. The scene was chaotic. Phones ringing non-stop. Employees hunched over desks. Stacks of files scattered across workstations. At first glance, it looked like any other government office. But as Sophia made her way toward the front desk, she felt it, the stares. Heads turned. Eyes lingered. A mix of curiosity and doubt. Then, a man in his 50s with silver-framed glasses stepped toward her. There was no warmth in his expression. "You must be Sophia Walker." She nodded. "Yes, the president appointed me to work here." The man folded his arms, his eyes scanning her with quiet skepticism. "I'm Richard Coleman, head of human resources." Then, without missing a beat, his voice sharpened. "Let me be clear, this isn't a battlefield, and we don't operate on orders and obedience like the military." Sophia held her ground. "I'm not here to give orders. I'm here to work." Coleman smirked, unconvinced. He turned and motioned to an assistant. A moment later, a towering stack of files was dropped onto the desk in front of her. "Good. Then start with these." Sophia grabbed the files, flipping through the first few pages. And then? Her stomach twisted in anger. Buried beneath bureaucracy. Some applications had been gathering dust for over 3 years. Some veterans had been denied benefits for vague reasons like incomplete documentation or lack of sufficient medical proof. One case caught her eye. A soldier who had served in Iraq, injured in an explosion. His request for medical compensation had been under review for over 2 years. Sophia looked up, her voice sharper than before. "Some of these veterans have been waiting for years. Why haven't these cases been processed?" Coleman shrugged, his expression indifferent. "That's the system. Everything needs to be reviewed properly." Sophia pressed her lips together, inhaling deeply, but when she spoke, the frustration in her voice was impossible to hide. "That's not a system. That's a failure." A few employees nearby glanced over. Sensing the tension, Coleman crossed his arms, raising an eyebrow. "You may have the president's backing, Walker, but you're not going to change the way things work here overnight." Sophia locked eyes with Coleman. "No, I can't change everything overnight. But I can start today." Without waiting for a response, she grabbed the towering stack of files and marched toward her newly assigned desk. A broken system. Later that afternoon, Sophia buried herself in the backlog of veteran claims. And a pattern quickly emerged. The more complex the case, the longer it had been delayed. Severe injuries, psychological trauma. The veterans who needed help the most were the ones waiting the longest. Enough was enough. She picked up the phone and dialed one of the numbers from the list. A war worth fighting. Sophia Walker's battle had only just begun. She had fought for her country overseas. Now, she would fight for every veteran left behind. Because this wasn't just a bureaucratic failure. It was a national disgrace. And she refused to let it continue. Because some battles aren't fought with weapons. They are fought with determination, resilience, and the refusal to accept injustice. Breaking the system, Sophia Walker stood her ground. Her heart pounding, but her resolve unshaken. Coleman's words were laced with doubt. With the kind of arrogance that came from years of watching others try and fail. "Do you really think you can change this system?" Sophia didn't blink. "I don't think. I know." Coleman studied her for a long moment. Then shook his head and let out a quiet chuckle. "I've seen people like you before. Fired up, determined, but then they realize something. Washington doesn't change just because one person wants it to." Sophia's fists tightened at her sides. "I don't need Washington to change overnight. I just need them to know they can't ignore me." She turned and walked out, knowing full well that she had just made a powerful enemy inside the Department of Veterans Affairs. But that didn't matter. She hadn't come here to make friends. She had come here to fight. Her first day had been anything but easy. But she knew this was only the beginning. She was no longer on a battlefield where bullets whizzed past her head. Now, she was surrounded by bureaucratic red tape, by a system that resisted change. She was still in a war, and this was a war she intended to win. Step 1. Find allies. Sophia once believed that the harshest battlefield she had ever faced was the one where an explosion could take a life in an instant. But now she realized there was another kind of battlefield. One where the enemies didn't carry weapons. Instead, they hid behind expensive suits, polished desks, and stacks of paperwork. They controlled the fate of thousands of veterans, not with bullets, but with bureaucracy. She needed a plan. Step 1. Find allies. Sophia began reaching out to veteran support organizations, listening to the stories of those the system had abandoned. She met with former service members, men and women still fighting a different kind of battle every day. A battle against red tape, endless paperwork, and an indifferent system. One of the first veterans she spoke with was Hank Lawson, a Vietnam War veteran. He had been waiting for disability benefits for 15 years. His claim had been delayed and denied repeatedly over a simple excuse: insufficient documentation. Michael Turner, 67 years old, Vietnam War veteran, filed for disability benefits in 2019. Still no response. The phone rang several times. Then, a voice answered, rough, tired, worn down by years of waiting. Hello? Sophia straightened in her chair. Mr. Turner, my name is Sophia Walker. I'm with the Department of Veterans Affairs. I'm reviewing your disability claim, and I see it's been delayed for 3 years. I wanted to reach out and see how I can help. A bitter laugh echoed through the line. 3 years, sweetheart? I've been waiting 15. Sophia gripped the phone tighter, anger and helplessness swelling in her chest. Have you ever received any response at all? Turner let out a dry chuckle. At first, yeah, they told me I needed to submit more paperwork. Then after that, nothing. I called hundreds of times. Every time, the answer was the same: your file is under review. At some point, I just stopped calling. Sophia clenched her jaw, anger burning inside her. Men like Michael Turner had given their youth, their strength, their very lives to protect this country. And now, when they needed help the most, they were abandoned. She took a deep breath, her grip tightening on the phone. Mr. Turner, I promise you, your file will not be ignored for one more day. She hung up. Then, without hesitation, she turned on her heel and marched straight into Coleman's office. Coleman looked up, raising an eyebrow at the fire in her eyes. I need to know why a veteran has been waiting over a decade for benefits and still has nothing. Coleman let out a sigh, leaning back in his chair. Like I told you, the claims process is complicated. We receive thousands of applications every year. And Sophia slammed a stack of files onto his desk, cutting him off. Her voice was like steel. These people are not numbers on a spreadsheet. They are human beings, fighting every single day to survive. And I will not stand by and let them be forgotten. A broken promise. They met at a small, quiet cafe. Hank took one look at her, let out a dry chuckle, and shook his head. You really think you can change the system, kid? His voice was rough, likely from years of smoking in the service. Sophia didn't flinch. I don't think. I know. Hank took a slow sip of coffee, squinting at her. People before you have said the same thing. Then they gave up. Sophia stayed silent for a beat, then reached into her bag and placed a folder on the table. I reviewed your case. She flipped through the pages. I found 3 letters, dated all the way back to 2010. They said your claim was under review. But the truth is, no one has touched it in over a decade. Hank let out a bitter laugh, but there was no humor in it. Same old story. Sophia leaned in. And you think that's okay? Hank didn't answer. Sophia exhaled, her voice firm. I need your help. Hank raised an eyebrow. Help with what? I need you to tell your story. The more voices we raise, the harder it will be for the system to ignore us. Hank studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. All right, kid, if you're willing to fight, then I won't sit back and watch. Step 2. Make Washington listen. The next step was getting Washington's attention. Sophia reached out to the media, sending emails to journalists, sharing stories like Hank's. At first, Most ignored her. They had heard stories like this 1,000 times before. But Sophia refused to be ignored. She called. She left voicemails. She even waited outside newsrooms, hoping to catch a journalist in person. Finally, a reporter from the Washington Post agreed to meet with her. Rachel Miller sat across from her, arms crossed, skepticism in her eyes. "What do you want from me?" Sophia met her gaze. "I want you to expose the truth." She pushed a folder across the table. "This system is failing the very people who once risked their lives for this country. I have evidence. I have witnesses. I just need you to help bring their stories to the public." Rachel was silent for a long moment. Then, she reached forward and took the folder of documents. "I'll look into it." It wasn't a promise, but it was something. A first crack in the wall of silence. Step 3. Fight from within. Meanwhile, inside the Department of Veterans Affairs, Sophia kept pushing. She demanded a review of the longest delayed cases. She worked directly with staff to expedite the process. But not everyone welcomed her presence. Richard Coleman, head of human resources, called her into his office. His irritation was barely concealed. "You're causing a lot of trouble." Sophia didn't flinch. "If fighting for veterans is causing trouble, then yes, I am." Coleman let out a dry chuckle. "You really think you can change a system that's been in place for decades?" Sophia's voice was steady. "I don't think. I know." Coleman smirked, leaning back. "Let's see how far you get." A war worth fighting. Sophia Walker's battle had only just begun. She had fought for her country overseas. Now, she would fight for every veteran left behind. Because this wasn't just a bureaucratic failure. It was a national disgrace. And she refused to let it continue. Because some battles aren't fought with weapons. They are fought with determination, resilience, and the refusal to accept injustice. And as long as veterans were being ignored, abandoned, and forgotten, Sophia Walker was not going anywhere. A new chapter in American history. Sophia Walker stood firm, her heart pounding as the weight of the moment settled over her. 1 year ago, she was just another forgotten soldier, struggling to find her place in a country she had once fought for. Now, she wasn't just part of the system, she was changing it. From an unemployed veteran standing at a press conference, pleading for a chance, to standing before the nation as the newly appointed Secretary of Veterans Affairs, this was a transformation no one had seen coming. A president's words, a nation's awakening. The White House press room was packed with reporters, government officials, and veterans who had once been left behind by the system. Camera flashes lit up the room. The entire country was watching. At the podium, President Donald Trump stood tall, his voice ringing with authority. 1 year ago, I met a woman at a press conference just like this, he said, his gaze sweeping across the crowd. She had nothing in her hands except courage and a simple question, "Mr. President, can you give me a chance?" The room fell silent. Sophia stood beside him, her back straight, her hands clasped, her eyes steady. She did not blink. Trump continued, his voice stronger now. "Today, I stand here to tell you that she didn't just take that chance, she turned it into a movement." A murmur rippled through the room. Because of her tireless efforts, tens of thousands of veterans are now receiving the support they deserve. Those who were once forgotten are finally being heard. Then, turning toward Sophia, a rare smile crossed his face. "And for her incredible contributions, I am proud to announce that Sophia Walker will officially take on the role of Secretary of Veterans Affairs for the United States." The room erupted. Journalists scrambled to take notes. Cameras zoomed in. Some clapped in admiration, while others sat stunned, their mouths slightly open in disbelief. Sophia's heart pounded. 1 year ago, she had nothing. Now, she wasn't the one asking anymore. She was the one leading. She took a step forward, accepting the microphone from Trump's hand. Her voice was strong, yet filled with emotion. "When I left the military, I felt invisible," she began, scanning the faces before her. "I didn't know what came next. And I wasn't alone. Millions of veterans face the same struggles, forgotten, abandoned." She took a deep breath, then turned directly to the cameras. Her words now a message to every veteran watching at home. "But I stand here today to tell every veteran listening, you are not invisible. We will fight to ensure that every soldier who leaves the military has a clear path forward." Her voice did not waver. "This is not the end. This is just the beginning." Applause thundered through the room. The movement grows. That night, news of Sophia's appointment dominated every major headline and social media feed. Veterans from all over the country flooded her inbox with letters, emails, and messages of gratitude. One young soldier, about to be discharged, wrote, "Because of you, I'm no longer afraid of what comes next." Sophia held the letter in her hands, her vision blurring with emotion. She knew the fight wasn't over. But this time, she wasn't fighting alone. She had started a movement, and it was only going to grow stronger. The movement grows. That night, news of Sophia's appointment dominated every major headline and social media feed. Veterans from all over the country flooded her inbox with letters, emails, and messages of gratitude. One young soldier, about to be discharged, wrote, "Because of you, I'm no longer afraid of what comes next." Sophia held the letter in her hands, her vision blurring with emotion. She knew the fight wasn't over. But this time, she wasn't fighting alone. She had started a movement, and it was only going to grow stronger. Sophia took a deep breath, then spoke, not as a politician, but as a soldier who refused to leave anyone behind. "I am not the only one who has ever felt forgotten." She paused, letting the words sink in. Millions of veterans out there are facing the same struggle. They sacrificed, they fought, but when they came home, they had to start over from nothing. Her voice lowered, but it was filled with unshakable determination. No one should have to go through that. The room was silent, the air thick with the weight of her words. Then, she lifted her chin and continued. "But we can change this. We can create a future where every soldier leaving the military has a clear path forward. A future where they no longer have to fight just to be recognized, but are welcomed with gratitude and the respect they deserve." She locked eyes with the cameras. Her next words directed at every American watching at home. If you know a veteran who is struggling, listen to them. If you have the chance, help them. And if you believe that those who gave their youth to protect this country deserve a second chance, then stand with us. Her voice grew stronger. Share this story. Raise awareness. And most importantly, never let those who served be forgotten. A heavy silence filled the room. Reporters nodded slowly. Cameras kept rolling. Sophia took a deep breath, then smiled softly. "My story is not just mine." She glanced at the letters on her desk, each one carrying the hopes of a veteran who had once been left behind. Then, she looked up, her voice steady, unwavering. "This is the story of millions of veterans across America. And I hope, with your help, we can write a new chapter. A chapter of hope. A chapter of change. A chapter of justice." She stood up. She walked out of the room, ready to face whatever came next. Because this war wasn't over. But this time, she wasn't fighting alone. A lesson in resilience and purpose. Sophia Walker's story is more than just an inspiring journey. It's a powerful reminder that persistence, courage, and a sense of purpose can change everything. In life, obstacles will always stand in our way, whether it's rejection, bureaucracy, or the feeling of being forgotten. But like Sophia, we must remember, our worth is not defined by how the world sees us, but by how we choose to fight for ourselves and others. If you ever feel overlooked or defeated, don't give up. Stand up, speak out, and push forward, because real change begins when we refuse to be silent.